Hey everyone, I'm Muneeb here, co-founder of Stacks, and I'm happy to be here at Reimagine.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Reimagine 2021. This is our seventh conference in a monthly series of events, bringing you nothing but the best projects, bright minds, and leaders in the space. We've been fortunate enough to invite many talented individuals and teams to come speak with us, providing updates, insights, and all the above that's happening in crypto. I'll be your host today, Adam, from the MouseBelt team, where we focus on early stage investments through our accelerator or providing development support to a number of growing projects, as well as education within the MouseBelt University program. Our main objective is pretty simple. Our goals are to increase adoption, use cases, and real-world applications. We seek to educate, our audience on blockchain, helping them understand crypto's real impact. Again, thanks for joining us at the moment. We have an exciting interview for you today. Let me go ahead and introduce you to Muneeb Ali, co-founder of Stacks. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to participate. Looking forward to an exciting discussion.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So, as I mentioned, kind of before the call here, we can find a lot of interviews, podcasts, right, all on YouTube. So let's kind of get the cliff notes, kind of like a quick backdrop of yourself, and we'll get into this interview to kind of set the tone here.
Yes, happy to. So I did my PhD in computer science at Princeton University, and that's where the Stacks project started as well. And Stacks basically brings smart contracts to Bitcoin. So think of that as we treat Bitcoin as a foundational layer, almost like TCP/IP for the internet. And we build the kind of like the missing features on top, which include smart contracts, but they also include some other parts of the stack like storage and so on. So developers effectively can unlock the potential of Bitcoin. Like if they want to deploy Bitcoin in smart contracts, if they want to write logic against Bitcoin, they can do that using Stacks.
Perfect. Thanks for summarizing that. And we'll get into that as we kind of go along here. So first things first, it's interesting. You're developing on Bitcoin. And again, I have some other questions, like tons of questions, and everybody else was kind of moving away from Bitcoin. So you obviously have a deep understanding of distributed systems. You have a PhD, master's degree in this field. What did you first think about Bitcoin? And then how did you know that could potentially be a solution after its perceived intention of digital gold or payments, right? So one, what did you first think about Bitcoin? And then how did you know that this could potentially, there was more to it? You saw obviously beyond it.
Yes. So I think, so my background before kind of discovering blockchain, so I entered the industry in around 2013. And before that, for a decade or so, I've been doing research work on distributed systems, next generation internet protocols. And I've been involved with several internet projects where they're effectively trying to build a next generation internet. And they typically kind of they're very exciting works, but they typically remain in academia. You'll have a prototype, you'll never really kind of commercialize it and actually change the internet, right? So we wanted to do things a little bit differently. We kind of came out of university to raise venture capital to do the R&D and actually try and commercialize a next generation internet, which is obviously almost like a moonshot type of a project, that it has a small probability of a very large success if you're actually able to build a different type of internet. And over there, we effectively discovered blockchains, more specifically the Bitcoin blockchain, as a very elegant solution for some of the problems we were trying to solve for building a next generation, decentralized, more secure internet. And the thing about seeing more to Bitcoin, that mostly comes from my training in distributed systems and peer-to-peer computing, that for me, Bitcoin was providing this global consensus layer where people can actually agree on information on a global scale in a very much trustless manner. And that doesn't need to be just about payments, right? Bitcoin is almost like a settlement layer where you can settle any type of information on it. And I'll explain more about what's the misconception about Bitcoin. Well, people think that, hey, Bitcoin is very limited, it only does one thing, and that is actually a misconception out in the industry about it.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think we'll let you kind of elaborate on that further. Were there other? So obviously, like Bitcoin, blockchain technology, distributed systems, cryptography, obviously has been around for years, right? Decades. So the '90s, there were a few attempts, and I think obviously technology just kept up and evolved. And were there other? So Bitcoin came out in 2008. Were there other blockchains like around that time that you were looking at, or was Bitcoin kind of the main? Obviously, it was the main one, but were there other? When you're in the moment, there's so many opportunities. And everybody thinks in hindsight, yeah, oh, Bitcoin is Bitcoin, but like, were there other chains at that point or attempts that people were trying to develop?
Yeah, so I think Bitcoin, as you said, 2008 is when it was conceived. Early 2009 is when the network launched, and then after a couple of years, I believe 2011 is when the first fork of Bitcoin, like first major fork of Bitcoin, came around called Namecoin, which was adding some functionality to Bitcoin, like the ability to register domain names, like a decentralized, almost like a DNS system. We experimented on top of Namecoin for a little while as well. And it's basically, I do think that there were a lot of different blockchains, especially in the early times. So I'm saying pre-Ethereum,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
wouldn't really take another blockchain like very seriously because it wouldn't have a lot of developer momentum behind it, or it wouldn't have a lot of kind of like serious design changes from how Bitcoin was built. They were mostly kind of like forks of Bitcoin with small changes. And then the question was, why wouldn't you just use Bitcoin, which is a much bigger network with a lot of hash power? And same arguments kind of like are true today as well. Bitcoin is still the largest network, still the most secure network. And I think Ethereum would kind of be the first effort that was a radically different implementation of a blockchain from scratch.
But how about those forks? And we don't need to go too much these forks of Bitcoin, but for those, we have like various audience and viewers right now that are tuning in terms of like either they know about this stuff or they're beginning. So like there were a bunch of forks of we'll call it Bitcoin, duplicates, replications, various changes and features. At any point, where aside from the community growth, did any of those make sense? I mean, you're my Bitcoin master here. Like, you understand it fully. So like there was, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 other chains that, forked Bitcoin at that time. Were any of them kind of seriously like taken or considered, in your mind?
I mean, in some of them, right? For example, Litecoin is still around,
Yeah.
and Litecoin has almost like found its use case as a place where sometimes there are Bitcoin proposals that get more easily deployed and tested on the Litecoin network first. And then, there's additional data point because Bitcoin is kind of like the backbone of the entire industry. So that's why it's very hard to make changes to Bitcoin. It's supposed to be very durable. So for example, if you want to do something a little bit more experimental, Litecoin has served that purpose where it would actually roll out some of the changes earlier than Bitcoin, and you would have real data of at least running on the Litecoin network that makes it easy. It gives you a higher confidence that, hey, you can actually push this change on Bitcoin as well. And then I think there are obviously some of the projects like, I forget when Monero came around, but it was pretty early as well. I use it. I think it has a very clear use case. It had a very different value prop from Bitcoin. It focuses on privacy and private transactions. So I do think there have been like some real use cases from the early days as well.
And so 2013 rolls around. You guys, are picking up steam here. Before Ethereum, there was kind of like this there wasn't Ethereum. So like, how did you vision, and maybe the conversations too, when you guys are raising money, the perception as you just mentioned earlier, like, some of the restrictions and limitations, how did you get past those discussions? And then two, is that what influenced you to add those features and upgrades and like this layer 2 side and kind of not scale, but I guess make it more utility as opposed to just digital gold and just payments? Was that all kind of around 2013 up to, I guess, 2014, 2015 when Ethereum launched?
Yes, so I think the interesting thing here is some of the design decisions that Ethereum made back in, let's call it 2014 is when the paper came out. 2015 is when they launched. And I think some of the design decisions, they are actually quite fundamental even to this date, right? And it's like very fascinating to see actually. Like for example, as a computer scientist, when I read the Ethereum paper, my initial reaction was that there are a lot of like design problems with this thing, right? And as a like imagine like in typical research circles, you would do peer reviews and you would actually submit feedback and you follow through that process. Or there are certain kind of like known learnings in the distributed systems place, or game theory or applied cryptography or even programming languages that you would try to learn from. And I do think like Ethereum was a little bit of an outsider, right? And like Vitalik, obviously he's a very intelligent person, but he's relatively young, I think 19, 20 at that time. And there was a little bit of an outsider view coming in where I felt that some of the design decisions were actually, I would have picked very different design decisions. And interestingly, I think a lot of community gathered around Ethereum. In hindsight, it was because there was a culture of kind of like shipping faster, all experiments are fine, and being very open to experimentation. Whereas if you look at the Bitcoin culture, it's pretty much like very serious, and you are not going to mess with the Bitcoin protocol, and they're even the developers, and they might come across as they're all very nice people. I know some of them, but they might come across as a little bit more hostile than being very welcoming to especially newcomers, especially people who don't know what they're doing, right? It's a little bit like you need to like earn the respect of the Bitcoin developers to even have the voice there. And that's actually not a unique thing. Like if you look at Unix kernel developers, like people who actually hack on how the operating system actually works, like it's a similar type of a culture there. They're not going to let someone who just learned how to program to now mess around with the kernel of an operating system, right? And I think Bitcoin core protocol is a little bit like that. Like you need to have very much like a domain expertise to be able to work on it. Whereas Ethereum was welcoming to everybody, right? And it was that culture shift. But some of those design decisions, like they're not going to disappear. If you have a Turing complete programming language that has reentrancy, for example, the reentrancy is going to come back and bite you. And it comes back and bites it, solidity parameters again and again and again, right? Similarly, the type of scalability issues, like we saw this in 2017. Like you could actually do paper, like back of the envelope calculations to be able to tell that, hey, Ethereum actually can't scale, right? But the normal developers who are getting excited about smart contracts and they were getting excited about the possibilities of like what can happen, they're not systems engineers. They don't realize that, hey, once I build this thing and if it really starts to take off, Ethereum won't be able to scale. And people had that understanding in 2017 when the network started getting a lot of traffic, and then people would remember CryptoKitties. The CryptoKitties just effectively jammed the network, and then those people had to go off and build a separate blockchain and so on. But those were things that they were writing on the wall, like we could see it, right? Like it's coming. It's just that most people don't realize it.
And real quick, going back to stay on this topic too, in terms of like the research circle, would you say that was the minority of kind of the understanding of the Ethereum white paper and kind of the restrictions and limitations there, as you're mentioning? And were you guys took that into consideration, obviously prior to Ethereum's launch, in determining like the design, the architecture and design for at one point what was block stacks, but now it's stacks?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, right? So we have, for example, done almost like 3 years of R&D on just the programming language, the Clarity programming language, which is now live. And Algorand, again, they're scientists from MIT and so on. They also collaborate on that language because they basically see the same reasons for using that language as we do. And similarly for scalability or building on Bitcoin, like we were like more careful with how to design and plan out these systems, because you can launch something that doesn't scale, or you can launch something that is kind of like dangerous for programmers, but that doesn't get you a lot, right? So and interestingly, you said that were we the minority? Absolutely, right? So
Yeah.
especially in the beginning, it was very
Because at
interesting
the beginning, of this, which is I'm so happy to have you on, right? Is like the perception of like Bitcoin and like it doesn't scale. It's just cool, it's very limited in its use case and application, store of value. But like when I started, researching, stacks overall and kind of listening to you talk previously, it just seems like it makes sense that it shouldn't have been, it shouldn't just be Ethereum and the winner. And here we are today thinking, well, there's a lot of issues with other chains popping up, seeing kind of the writing on the wall. And we don't know yet, right? Ethereum is going to work on it. But what you're telling me is you're kind of answering a lot of the myths, a lot of the perception that Bitcoin, it is what it is, and like that's it. But you're bringing a whole new thing. So sorry not to interrupt you, but 3 years of research, R&D.
And yeah, so I think you're absolutely right when you said that were we a part of the minority early on, and we did. Like sometimes I would feel that because a lot of people working in the crypto industry, they were what I would consider like outsiders. But
Yeah.
it's actually a good thing as well, right? Like other
Yeah.
people are getting a chance, that they're getting an opportunity, but they're not people who are coming from some of the top research universities or some of the research labs out there. Like, for example, the person who designed Clarity language
Yeah.
worked at Microsoft Research compiler group.
Wow.
So like building compilers for people who have actually been like doing this for a living, right?
Yeah.
And interestingly, I think something changed in 2017 when there was a kind of like the ICO mania. A lot of like sophisticated players actually started paying attention to crypto. So since late 2017 and onwards, I feel actually very grateful that now there are a lot of sophisticated teams working in the area. Like,
Yeah.
so some of the projects, like for example, we collaborated with Algorand. There's Avalanche by Emin Gunserer.
Yeah.
There's Solana. Even the founders behind Near Protocol, they're like
Yeah.
really smart programmers who actually really know what they're doing. And I think that's such a healthy change, because now like there's so many experiments happening, and where my confidence level, like that these people are actually working on kind of like the technical details and really know what they're doing, is much higher now compared to 2017 and before.
It seems as though Bitcoin led the way. Ethereum comes in to kind of make some adjustments. I wouldn't call them band-aids, but just some tweaks, some features to kind of get it off the ground in a different, maybe a different strategy. And then now, like you just brought up some other teams, Solana, Near, Algorand, Ava, that are tackling a lot of Ethereum's challenges at the moment. And like, where do you fit into amongst these other players? With earlier research, same kind of bandwidth in terms of pedigree. Yeah, where do you like? It seems like Bitcoin's still in the mix, and nobody really talks about it.
Yes. So I think there's basically the way to look at the industry is there are three buckets. There's one bucket that is the most popular opinion, which is that smart contracts are going to happen on Ethereum, right? For that to happen, like ETH2 will need to ship, or some sort of a layer 2 would need to take off. Which I think, like I've been in favor of layer 2s for a long time, and I think it's a good thing that there are now sophisticated teams working on layer 2 technologies, and that's great. So that's one potential outcome, which I think is the popular opinion, that hey, Ethereum is winning, and they might ship ETH2 and so on. The second category is these next generation blockchains, and you can put all of them in a bucket almost, right? They're really good teams, hard to tell which one is going to succeed in what exact application area. But the story there is that, if Ethereum is unable to kind of like, upgrade to ETH2 or have good solutions, some of these players will start taking more market share. And then there's a third category that I think is completely contrarian, and very few people actually understand what it is. And that category is that a lot of smart contracts would actually end up happening on top of Bitcoin, right? And we are in that category.
Yeah.
And I think there are some other projects there as well, like
not many though.
Not many. Like RSK is doing some interesting work, and there are a few other projects, but I think we are in that camp, and it's very interesting because in some ways, like it is a contrarian bet, but it's a very huge bet because Bitcoin is the network that has $1 trillion worth of crypto capital. And if you could directly unlock that into smart contracts, it's potentially the largest opportunity out there.
Yeah, and I think it provides, because what I've heard from investors, and you brought some of the names up in terms of like, we're not holding Ethereum. Bitcoin is the option at the moment only because, first mover, right? And kind of the big player, but it doesn't have other utility. And I've been hearing that recently. So it's great to hear like what you're working on to change that narrative. And now applying smart, and one of the things was like, it doesn't do smart contracts, it doesn't do this, can't build, it's not flexible, can't build upon it. But you're telling me otherwise. So what are some of the, I guess, the designs that allow you, or we can get into stacks now, I guess. Like what are the problem solutions that others are trying to solve and you guys have continuously been working on, that are different, to our viewers out there that understand Bitcoin at a high level, understand Ethereum at a high level, but you're applying kind of both mindsets to make Bitcoin like a much more robust, network to use.
Yes. So I think let me first make one point about Bitcoin, and then I'll come to the work
Perfect.
we're doing. So I think one interesting thing about Bitcoin, and I think a lot of people confuse this, is Bitcoin is going after the use case for store of value, right? The digital gold narrative that's actually taking hold everywhere, and people like large companies like Tesla and Square, they're taking their corporate treasuries and actually hedging against inflation by buying Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin actually has product market fit in that category. It's a very simple, and for that, Bitcoin actually doesn't need to change. It needs to be durable. It needs to be like a store of value, like a scarce thing, and it's doing that, right? I think where people confuse things, more generally speaking, is where they don't fully understand what market gas for smart contracts is in, right? It's a very different market from store of value. Gas for smart contracts is more similar to like AWS, where Amazon Web Services is doing computations and is capturing some value for running those computations, right? So ETH is gas. Like, sure, a lot of people would make the argument that no, ETH is money and it's going to become internet money. But if you look at the use of Ethereum, it's actually as gas for smart contracts. It is not being used as a store of value. There's no corporate treasury that is buying Ethereum as a hedge against the dollar. They're not. They might look at it as an innovative new network, but the use is actually gas for smart contracts, and which is what the other layer one protocols are as well. So I think when you clearly separate out gas for smart contracts, and I'm actually working on a platform that is gas for smart contracts, but I don't pretend that it's a bigger market than Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right? So we almost like cleanly separate these two markets, and we say that Bitcoin is going for store of value. If I was working on a store of value system, like that's actually a very, very hard thing to work on, right? Like it is a uphill battle. Gas for smart contracts is a more straightforward thing, relatively speaking, because your market there is actually developers. You want developers to come use these smart contracts, build using the smart contracts, and then use the gas in smart contracts. It's actually a pretty simple AWS-like market, right? Where their primary customer is actually developers. Bitcoin is going against like a whole lot of other things. So what we do is we clearly separate ourselves from Bitcoin. We say Bitcoin is the store of value, and we are going to build a smart contract platform that actually settles on Bitcoin. Right? So just like you have Lightning does payments and then settles on Bitcoin. Our blockchain is designed in a way, it is a kind of like a layer one blockchain, like it's not really a side chain, but it's designed in a way that thousands of transactions on stacks automatically settle on Bitcoin, every Bitcoin block. So it's a little bit like if every Bitcoin block, a Lightning channel was automatically settling on it. Right?
Yeah.
And then we designed the programming language Clarity. Very quickly, the main difference there is that Clarity programs are what's called decidable, meaning that you know exactly what the program is going to do before executing it, right? So it's a security property. It's like code that runs on an airplane. There's formal verification behind that code that this code is not going to do something wacky and then just like crash the airplane. Like that's the kind of security you need for smart contracts code, because the main thing you're doing with smart contracts is actually dealing with a large amounts of assets and money. Like people are keeping like hundreds of millions of dollars on these smart contracts. So the new thing about these programs is that they run on a blockchain and they keep a lot of valuable assets on it. So the only property to optimize for really is security. And that's what Clarity does. And interestingly, because the way it's built, Clarity actually has visibility into Bitcoin. So you can actually write programs, like for example, a lending application that I want to borrow Bitcoin from you. There can be a Clarity contract that can actually, I can provide collateral through that Clarity contract, and you would just do a Bitcoin transaction, right? That's why I'm saying that this is like DeFi for Bitcoin, because you would just send a Bitcoin transaction, and if your Bitcoin doesn't come back by a certain block height, Clarity would kind of like release the collateral to you. Right. So that's where I think it's a little bit like putting everything in the right bucket, because it's going to be, in my view, is going to be almost like a next generation internet stack, where Bitcoin is that base layer and is the store of value and the settlement layer. Stacks brings in the smart contract layer, and then developers are kind of like building interesting things on top.
Now, does the Bitcoin layer foundation kind of provide more of a more decentralization as opposed to some of these other chains?
Yes. So I think the reason to build on Bitcoin, there are several reasons, but the top ones are that it is a open, decentralized network that is pretty much like, if you think about, which blockchain is going to be around 50 years from now or 100 years from now, Bitcoin is probably going to be here. We don't know about other systems, right? So it's the durability of Bitcoin, and that it's an open network. You don't need permission from anyone. Same for Stacks, right? Anyone can be a miner on Stacks. It's an open, decentralized system. And we actually, one thing I didn't get into is that we reuse the hash power of Bitcoin, which is actually not only like better for energy usage and so on, but it's actually very interesting for the community building, because we depend on Bitcoin. Right? So we have a vested interest in Bitcoin succeeding. So we are not fighting with Bitcoin. Like there's no scenario in which I think that Stacks is going to flip Bitcoin or we'll take over Bitcoin's market cap. So it's like friendly projects who want to grow together, and we clearly depend on Bitcoin for our success. And then interestingly, the way the economics of Stacks works is that people who are Stacks holder, if they participate in consensus, they're actually earning Bitcoin from the protocol. Right. So you see Bitcoin transactions coming into your wallet. And then when you earn Bitcoin from the asset, like it also kind of like, reinforces this financial stake that if smart contracts on Stacks are taking off, you actually get a higher yield in Bitcoin. So there's a very tight loop between the success of Bitcoin and the success of Stacks.
Does the volatility have an effect on that kind of closed loop circle, like stacking and rewards and the ups and downs of volatility? Does that affect any of the parameters or environment developing or incentivization and all that? I mean, obviously if it goes up, it's great, but it's so crazy. So like, how does that affect, or it may not?
It does. There's several factors, but effectively, I think the STX BTC pair is an important one, right? If Stacks is kind of like appreciating against Bitcoin, you're actually getting more Bitcoin rewards. But then there are other things in the equation, because the miners who are sending the Bitcoin, they look at the value of the block, right? So there's some newly minted Stacks in it, but then there are also the gas fees. So there's a lot of developer traction and a lot of people, like for example, the problem that Ethereum is having right now, where the fees are like $100 and they're running out of space. If that happened on Stacks, the Stacks holders would be getting an insane amount of yield, right? Because the Bitcoin needed to mine the block would be very high, and that Bitcoin is actually distributed to the Stacks holders the way the consensus algorithm is designed.
When you were raising funds back in the day, like how did this come across? Were they like open to it? Was there some barriers there to kind of understanding this concept when Again, you're kind of changing the whole perception around and like separating the two, which make total sense now. So like, what were some of those? What was the feedback there when you're trying to let them know, like, hey, we have a solution to kind of battle, what you think the problem is with Bitcoin, the way that we're trying to use it, not in, like you said, not the store value, not the long term kind of. How did that go? How did those discussions go?
Yeah, I think interestingly, like we've just been very lucky to have investors who really believed in the team and the vision. So interestingly, like I really think they were funding an R&D project. So
Okay.
Union Square Ventures and Naval Ravikant and Y Combinator and others, I think they were early on. They were basically putting money into an R&D project, and we were very open with them that hey, we are going to do R&D for a very long time, and we are building open source software, and we don't have any monetization plans and so on, right? So they knew what kind of like they were getting into. But I do think the idea of like building on Bitcoin was pretty much like contrarian, because a lot of people
Yeah.
would be like, hey, why would you do it on Bitcoin and not on Ethereum? And like the amount of times people have asked me, is Stacks a ERC20? And I'm like, you can't, I can't even begin to explain like how it, it,
Different.
it is not an ERC20, and
Yeah.
it would never be an ERC20, and so on.
Yeah. No, not even close. So we talk about DeFi, NFTs, different verticals, different kind of sectors within crypto. We talked about payments. Like, so what's the target market for stacks for the developer? Is it kind of the same? Like, how does DeFi benefit, or how does it all make sense since it is contrarian? How do you make sense of bringing DeFi to stacks, kind of with this whole Bitcoin, underlying? Like, how does that work?
Yes. So I think it goes back to our core thesis, right? Our core thesis is that successful experiments that happen in crypto will eventually get developed on top of Bitcoin, right? If that thesis is not true, like we're not going to succeed. But if
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
thesis is true, right? Meaning that, like, let me give you an example. Let's say a liquidity protocol like Aave has turned out to be a successful experiment on top of Ethereum. What that tells developers is building a liquidity protocol on top of Bitcoin, which has $1 trillion of liquidity, is a very good idea, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody implements that and it really takes off, like, so I think that's really the model. And I think we're kind of like seeing that. We're seeing that in even NFTs, where people are now getting really excited about NFTs, and then you have discussions with some artists, and you go like, well, if you issue your NFT on Bitcoin, like that it's not going to go away, and would you get paid in Bitcoin, or would you get paid in like some other cryptocurrency, right? So do you want liquidity around your NFT to be in Bitcoin? So I think like that's the core thesis, but you can apply it to almost like every single application, be it DeFi, NFT, decentralized applications. Like for example, domain names, right? A lot of people have the .eth domain names, and this is in the pipeline, but very soon there will be like domain names on Bitcoin. Like,
So what you're telling me is, if it's going to work on Ethereum or some other chain, it's definitely going to work on the Bitcoin chain without some of the barriers that are happening now, some of the challenges, right?
yes, like that is what we
Yeah.
bring. So we bring
If it
the
works here, it's going to work here.
right. We solve the scalability issues, and we bring the Clarity smart contract language, which is general enough that you can program anything and in a very safe way. Like that's the work that we've kind of been doing.
And what about if ETH2 does succeed? Then what? And are you a believer in multiple chains or one chain or a select few chains for different industries, verticals, applications and use cases?
Yeah, I think my best guess at this point is that we are going to see a bunch of experimentation, right? So it's like, we might actually see more projects, more experiments, and in the coming years, and then we might start to see consolidation. That at some point, some of these projects are going to kind of like run out of money, or people would kind of like start consolidating to other chains. But it's unclear what the world will look like after consolidation. I think my best
Yeah.
guess right now is that it will be a multi-chain world, but likely not like hundreds of chains. Maybe I think there are like 10 or so
Yeah.
chains, and they are able to specialize in some way that, and they can coexist actually. I think to reach a stable scenario, you would have to basically be in a place where these chains are able to coexist in a way that they're actually like mutually beneficial to each other. And I think that's what might happen after consolidation.
And what about interoperability? So with stacks, with Bitcoin, to this whole other side of new, the next generation blockchains. Is that like is that possible?
Yeah, so I think people are building bridges. People are looking into cross-chain liquidity and so on. So I think all of that is interesting, and we're open to it in many ways. Like because Stacks has the smart contract functionality, it actually becomes the more natural place where if someone wants to kind of like connect to Bitcoin, it's easier for them to connect to Bitcoin if they connect to Stacks, right? Because you can actually have the smart contracts that help you with the bridge itself.
And a lot of people are trying to bring Bitcoin to Ethereum as in wrappers. Vice versa. What you're saying is it'd be wise to start, at some point. This is going to probably happen where you're going to try and bring Ethereum to Bitcoin as a wrapper.
Potentially, right? And interestingly, I'm actually more interested in like assets that are not wrapped.
Yeah.
Like in the example that I gave, like if you were kind of like lending your Bitcoin, but you had to go to a wrapped asset. So what changes for you is like tax consequences, like the BTC to wrapped BTC and back might be a taxable event, and then you're taking now risk outside of the Bitcoin blockchain, right? Like
Yeah.
your asset is now like on some other chain and so on. So I think the simplest thing is like if people can just keep Bitcoin and in Bitcoin on the Bitcoin main chain, but then there are interesting things you could do if there's a wrapped asset in a more decentralized way. So one interesting thing with Stacks is that even the wrapped asset is backed by Bitcoin, right? So to attack our blockchain, you have to attack Bitcoin, right?
Wow.
So all of the history is actually backed by Bitcoin. So I think there are some interesting properties there, but uh, like I don't know how this happened, but I'm just looking at the decisions we have made and decisions Ethereum has made, and I swear this is not on purpose, but they are the exact opposite of each other in every single thing, like all the way to even regulations, right?
Yeah.
Like how Ethereum did their offering, like you looking at what the SEC has done so far, you could say that was an illegal securities
Yeah.
offering.
Yeah.
And we did the SEC qualified offering. They did a Turing complete language. We did a decidable language, which is kind of like the opposite. And they are building a separate network. We're building a Bitcoin. They're going for wrapped assets. We're going for like non-wrapped. Like it's like
Yeah.
I don't think we're doing this on purpose, but for some reason, like our design decisions are almost like the exact opposite of Ethereum.
And let's talk about stacks a little more. How does stacks operate? So we talked about smart contracts. You guys are building, leveraging the Bitcoin blockchain. You guys are just getting listed. You're not a security. It seems like everything's kind of flowing. So two questions. One, which maybe leads into the second one. One, give me some more insight onto stacks, kind of some of the benefits, that it's offering. And then two, like, one of the advantages that we hear that Ethereum and all these other Ethereum killers is the community and growth, documentation, education, everything's online. So, like, one, talk about stacks a little bit more here, for our viewers to get some more insight based off of what you just said, for the interview. And then two, like, how do you round up? How does that bring in more developers, I guess, and grow the community to change from what everybody's used to developing on now to kind of coming back, to the Bitcoin side and tapping into stacks here?
Yeah. So I think on the stack side, the kind of things that I think would stand out is, I would say the first is actually the team. So I'm not the only computer scientist on it. Like I think we were able to get some of the brightest minds to come and work on the project. I think there's something like 5 PhDs from Princeton, Stanford, you name it, people with deep expertise who have actually spent years and years. Like imagine this is like 5-6 years of work, right? The blockchain went live 6 weeks ago, but it is 5-6 years of work of really kind of like, if you look at our GitHub, the commit history goes like years and years back. So the first thing is actually kind of like the team and the amount of hard work that we did. I think interestingly, actually an analogy would be when we did the SEC qualification, the industry kind of like knew very clearly that that was very hard, like coming up with a legal framework, the accounting framework, the 300 pages of the SEC filing that was there. Just by looking at it, people were like, this team kind of like did a lot of hard work to get that done, right? We are not lawyers by training. We are computer scientists, right? So imagine the amount of work that we have done on building the right thing in terms of stacks, right? So I think that's the first thing. And then if you're a developer, the really interesting thing about Clarity is that it is a decidable language, meaning that you don't have to worry about getting manual audits of your code or be scared to do like something that goes awfully wrong. You get formal verifications like out of the box, right? And there's no compiler even, the way we designed it. Wow. People say that code is law.
Yeah.
If you go to our Explorer, you can literally see the code in the blockchain. So wow. You don't see like compiled code, you see the exact code, and you know that what the developer wanted to write is the exact thing that's running as well, right? And if their intention was different, then you know that, oh, I programmed something wrong, and it was very clear what that thing was, right? And it has a lot of really interesting features around post conditions. Like, for example, you're writing a program and you say, no matter what this program does, never take more than like 5 stacks out of my wallet, right?
Yeah.
So it's really designed around really for developers, that how easy it is for them to program like smart contracts and basically get going. And then same for the design with Bitcoin, right? It's a little bit like transactions on stacks are cheap, right? It scales out. We have this very interesting thing called micro blocks where you can get faster confirmations. And then you have the peace of mind that this is getting written to Bitcoin.
It's going to settle. Yeah.
Right. It's going to settle on Bitcoin. Finality is from Bitcoin. So in terms of like peace of mind, you're effectively like, in a way, you're even de-risked from stacks because all the state is getting settled on Bitcoin. So if something drastic happens to stacks, the previous history is actually archived forever in the Bitcoin blockchain. Right. And yeah, you had a question or?
No, sorry.
Okay. So I think, and then another thing that I should emphasize is that this is not the only thing we've been building, right? So we actually have the rest of the stack, which includes storage, authentication, like if you're how to log into applications. And we experimented with real developers, right? So we got something like 400 applications built on the network. Some of the really interesting ones, one is called Pravica. It's like a decentralized, secure WhatsApp. And there's one called Boom. It's a NFT platform on stacks and Bitcoin. And interestingly, like we've been working with these developers for years, right? Yeah. To kind of like polish out the full stack. That smart contracts are kind of like the main focus, but the rest of the infrastructure that developers need, that's also there as well. And that kind of like brings me to the second question. And I think people don't realize how early we are in smart contracts, like in the sense that 99% of the developers have never written a smart contract, right? So the bulk of the market is basically, the way in my mind this works is, most of the people are going to discover crypto through Bitcoin first. Right? Sure. They're going to hear about Bitcoin. They're going to be like, what is this thing? They're going to try and learn about it. And what was happening was people would discover Bitcoin, and then they'll figure out that Bitcoin is not programmable. And then they would discover Ethereum or some other blockchain, and they'll be like, okay, to write smart contracts, I go to Ethereum. And I think there's a big gap in the middle that we fill, where you just discovered Bitcoin and you want to program it. Yeah. And now we help you how to program Bitcoin. So I think like that's kind of like the funnel, and most of the developers are kind of like outside of crypto. And interestingly, one thing I've noticed all the time is, just like, again, connecting back to our SEC qualification, just like if you are a really good lawyer, you would actually end up agreeing with what we did, that, hey, that was the sophisticated approach, that was the right way to approach it. If you're a really good engineer, you actually end up agreeing with what we're doing.
Right? Yeah.
So interestingly, it is the engineers who are just trying to learn how to program, or they actually don't know how the underlying systems work. They end up getting attracted more to systems like Ethereum. Really sophisticated engineers who kind of like look under the hood, and they want to know like how things actually work. They find the problems in Ethereum, and they're actually more attracted to systems like Stacks, and which is a very high signal thing, and which I'm very excited about. So I think that's how I would look at future growth and the kind of developer activity.
And how about like tooling and infrastructure and tooling to kind of streamline dApps and applications and get this to fruition, more people involved. Is that all there, the infrastructure?
Yes. So I think you mentioned earlier that the project was called Blockstack, and one of the reasons that we simplified it to Stacks is the company, my company that I co-founded and run, was also called Blockstack. So no wonder people were confused between the company and the project. So what we did is that during the kind of like our path to decentralization, there are now several entities like the Stacks Foundation and Freehold, which is the community entity, Daemon, which is a mining entity, or various clients and so on. The company that built kind of like the core protocol rebranded to Hero. So there's no more kind of like Blockstack there. It's the Stacks project, and then there's Hero, which is a developer tooling company, and I'm the CEO of Hero. And so developer tooling is so important for us that that's kind of like the main job of my company, and all we do is basically build developer tooling on top of the Stacks blockchain.
Nice. And in this community, right, there's so many grants, programs, bounties, and all that. Do you guys offer that as well to get some teams on board?
Yes. So the Stacks Foundation, it basically has 100 million stacks, which at today's price would be $110 million, right? So most of that is for developers, and it's a nonprofit, no non-shareholders. It's not a foundation that basically was there to do token offerings or anything like that. It's a new entity that was almost like community driven, and it is there for developers. Right. So all of the grants, everything's very transparent, right? Like they publish all of their board meeting minutes, all the kind of like their bylaws and so on.
Yeah, no, nice. I think we're coming up on just like a couple minutes here, like very eye-opening, very like understanding. Thank you for clarifying a lot of the misconceptions and thoughts on one network versus the other. And nobody really thinks about Bitcoin, although you guys have been around a long time. I mean, I know people are developing on Bitcoin, but even me being in the space, I still don't quite see that many teams. And it seems like, you're still in the mix. Stacks is here, producing infrastructure tooling for developers, streamlining that. Use cases are still available in terms of like whatever you think you can build on, on the Ethereum side, you can definitely build on, the Stacks and Bitcoin side. Is there anything that you haven't shared that, as we wrap this up that you want to showcase before we get off here?
Yeah, I'll just showcase one thing, that if people want to get a sense of what DeFi on Bitcoin looks like, they should go to stacking.club, and it shows this PUX contract, which is kind of like a main contract in our consensus. And so the Stacks blockchain went live 6 weeks ago. This contract started functioning like 4 weeks ago, or maybe less than 4 weeks ago. And so far, we have more than $200 million locked up in that contract.
Wow.
Earning Bitcoin at, I think in the last cycle, the APY was something like 23%. Right. So the UX of this is like people get Bitcoin transactions just in their wallet, like be it Coinbase, be it like your local wallet on Electrum or so on. And you're locking up capital, you're earning Bitcoin, and DeFi on Bitcoin is already here, right? Like, and then this is like just one contract, and you'll basically start seeing a lot of other kind of like DeFi like applications on top of Bitcoin go live.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Two last questions actually. The UI UX on that we've all been battling, is that how are you guys like approaching that?
Yes, I do think the UI UX needs to improve in the entire crypto industry. We have been paying a lot of attention to it. Like we want to simplify a lot of these things for the users, and we have some experience, right? We have a couple of years of experience of working with developers, where how complicated it is for them to like manage their private keys and so on. So I think we have made a lot of progress. One again product that people should check out, like it's called Stacks Connect. People who are familiar with MetaMask, it's kind of like the alternative to MetaMask, but then you can go and see the UX difference. I do really think that the team building Connect has done a really good job on the UX side of it. But in general, I think I'm more confident that developers will find their way and learn how to program smart contracts. But I think more work is required before users start to feel comfortable and understand kind of like these these applications.
Yeah, nice. And then another question, sorry, on the developer side, if one was developing on the Ethereum community and this, these EVM machines and all that, based off of the coding language that you have, what's the skill level got to be to develop within your network?
I think I would say similar skill level. The one difference is that I think Ethereum attracted a lot of JavaScript developers, the people who are building websites, and they know JavaScript, and Solidity looks like JavaScript. So our language looks different. It actually looks more like Lisp. But then people have written JavaScript transpilers, meaning you write JavaScript code and it kind of like compiles to Clarity and then Clarity runs. I would say the difficulty level is maybe a little bit harder, but at the same time, I think the feedback that I got from developers is that it just takes you a little of a time to get your head around how this works. But once you get it, your job actually becomes easier. So I think the mental model is a little bit like you are investing in your own abilities upfront. But once you do that, then the mileage goes a long way after that, right? So that's the way to approach it.
And there's gonna be a new wave of devs, anyways. Like we're talking Web 2.0 to Web 3.0. Right now, there's still a transition. Not that many Web 3.0 devs. So I feel like for the audience here, the viewers that are tuning in, like listening on career paths or like where to develop, what to do. I think everybody's almost in the same boat as far as developing languages, coding and all that, trying to understand that as we move forward, it's universities are going to pick this up. Like I think that's kind of a small barrier, not even a barrier. It's just another learning curve, right? For either an existing developer to kind of pick up, which they already know, just learning new languages. The learning curve is always there anyways, if you're going to, pick up something, and that's kind of the life. Yeah. They love a challenge anyways. And then you have the flip side of like this new wave of engineers and developers, like probably going to pick this up rather quickly as soon as it kind of, expands to more adoption.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think the other thing is that developers would learn anything if they think there's a market on the other side, right?
Exactly.
So as Bitcoin is kind of like gaining traction, like imagine that Bitcoin has $1 trillion of capital. Most of it is passive. Like we brought up like WBTC. WBTC is not even 1% of Bitcoin, not even 1%, right?
Yeah.
So if they think that there's a market on the other side where they can build lending applications, decentralized exchanges, like stable coins with collateral all on top of Bitcoin, they would do anything to be able to program that.
So totally agree. I don't think there's any challenge that they wouldn't tackle. I hear developers, I'm going to learn this. I'm going to learn how to build this. Most of them didn't know how to do anything prior to, their project, their startup. It was all mainly a crash course. So yeah, I don't see that being a problem at all. But I think we've come up on our hour here. And first of all, I just want to thank you for joining us, participating. Great interview, great insights. I think you clarified a lot of things for people that are trying to understand the landscape of what crypto is, what a blockchain is, the differences, the pros and cons. And I heard a lot of pros today coming from kind of the Bitcoin side. So it's very welcoming, a lot of the industry, it's a lot of Ethereum based, but like when you start talking to VCs and ingrained individuals, yourself and myself and other people, like there's challenges on the Ethereum side. It's not all hype, maybe people are building things quicker, but like you said, like we all know the writing's on the wall, and like today we know there's challenges. Will they deliver? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. But I think in that time, teams like yourself are going to catch up. People are going to realize, and this is kind of a long-term game. So like, whether it's 12 months or a few years, I think kind of the growth in community for the Bitcoin development will rise. Right.
No, absolutely. And I think given how quickly Bitcoin is rising, if you just attach your success to the success of Bitcoin, that's actually a pretty smart bet to take in this market. Awesome. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much.
Totally agree. Yeah. All right. Have a good one. For everybody watching Reimagine 2021, appreciate you tuning in. This is Muneeb from Stacks CEO. Great discussion, and we hope to have you back.
Awesome. Take care.